I never imagined that summer job as a tour guide in Redcliffe would take me to a place where the boundaries between the real and the unimaginable would blur so dangerously. I had always been fascinated by history, by the stories that old buildings and ruins could tell. When I heard about the abandoned school on the outskirts of town, my interest was immediately piqued, not out of morbid curiosity or a desire for adventure, but for a much more personal and painful reason. Years ago, a close friend disappeared without a trace, and the last time he was seen, he was heading towards that school. The police never found his body, nor any clue as to what might have happened. That doubt, that emptiness never stopped haunting me. Over the years, stories about the school began to emerge. Reports of voices in the middle of the night, unexplained shadows dancing across the broken windows, and the feeling of being watched by invisible eyes. I tried to convince myself that these were just stories, attempts to make sense of the pain and mystery surrounding the place. But something inside me needed to know, needed to understand what had happened, if there was any truth in these stories, or if, somehow, they could lead me to discover my friend's fate. It was this need, this desire to find answers, that led me to the school entrance on that cloudy summer afternoon. The air was heavy with a silence that seemed to whisper with voices from the past. As I took the first steps into the abandoned building, a chill ran down my spine, a warning that what I was looking for might be much darker than I could have imagined. The empty corridors echoed with the sound of my own footsteps, a constant reminder that I was alone, or so I thought. The search for answers had begun, a search that would take me to places I never imagined existed, to confront truths I never wanted to know. And it was there, in that school forgotten by time, that the voices of dead children spoke to me, unfolding a story so terrifying that I wish I had never started this search. With every step I took through the silent corridors of the school, the weight of the history of that place seemed to deepen, as if the walls were trying to speak to me. It was in an abandoned classroom, with its dust-covered desks and still open notebooks, that I felt for the first time that I wasn't alone. It was as if the children had just left, leaving behind a story frozen in time. The drawings on the walls, depicting happy scenes of families and animals, contrasted painfully with the darkness and abandonment that now dominated the room. As I explored the room, driven by a mixture of fear and fascination, I noticed shadows that seemed to move around the edges of my vision. I convinced myself that it was just the effect of the light coming through the broken windows, but the feeling that I was being watched grew with every moment. It was then that I heard for the first time a clear voice as fragile and delicate as the whisper of the wind. "Can you help me?" I turned around quickly, expecting to see someone, but there was no one there. The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. I followed the sound, getting louder and louder, until it led me to a small, forgotten room. In that room, the voice became a palpable presence, and an ethereal figure materialized before me. It was a girl, no older than 10, with a gaze so deep that it seemed to carry all the untold stories of that place. She introduced herself as Emily, and with a voice that mixed fear and hope, told me about the fire that had taken her life and the lives of many other children. Through Emily's eyes, I saw the flames consuming the school, a terror so real that I could feel the heat and smell the smoke in the air. She spoke with a desperate urgency, begging for help, not just for herself, but for the other souls trapped there, unable to find peace. Emily's desperation touched me deeply, awakening a determination I didn't know I possessed. I knew that, somehow, I had to help these souls find the rest they had been denied. The shadows that danced across the walls and the whispers that filled the air no longer frightened me like before. Now I had a purpose. I had to discover the truth behind the tragedy that bound these children together and somehow free them from the suffering that bound them to that place. The corridor I followed next was known among the ghosts of the school as the Corridor of Whispers. With every step I took, the silent calls of the dead children became clearer, filling the air with a melody of sadness and despair. It was as if the walls were breathing, whispering stories of pain and suffering that chilled the blood in my veins. But among the whispers, one voice stood out, guiding me deeper into the darkness, promising answers at the end of the corridor. At the end of that corridor, I discovered a room that seemed untouched by time, a capsule of the past frozen in chaos. Inside, newspaper clippings scattered across the floor told the story of the devastating fire that had consumed the school years ago. The headlines spoke of an unimaginable tragedy, with a number of victims that made your heart ache just to read it. Among the clippings, faded photos of children, smiles that would never shine again, eyes that would never see the sun. There, surrounded by the memories of these lost souls, I felt the weight of the story Emily was trying to tell me. The search for answers led me to a distinctive door, marked by deep scratches that looked like despair frozen into the wood. The door was locked, but determination and the need to understand, to help, pushed me forward. With effort, I managed to open the door, revealing a room that seemed to have been the epicenter of the horror. The scratches on the inside of the door told a story of terror and struggle, of children trying to escape an unforgiving fate. It was when I touched these scratches that the reality around me faded, giving way to visions of the past. I saw the trapped children, the fire consuming everything, the desperate struggle for survival. It was as if I was there, among them, feeling the heat of the flames, hearing their screams muffled by the roar of the fire. These visions, so vivid and painful, were not just memories. They were a silent cry for justice, a plea for peace that had been ignored for too long. Emerging from these visions with a heavy heart and a mind clouded with pain, I knew that my journey was far from over. I had to go on, not just for Emily, but for all the souls crying out for deliverance. The truth about the fire, about the suffering of those children, needed to be revealed and faced. It was a path I dreaded, but I knew I couldn't turn away from. The school library, a place that should be for learning and discovery, held the children's diaries, their innermost thoughts preserved in pages yellowed by time. Leafing through them, I saw their hopes and dreams so pure and full of life, contrasting painfully with the fate they had met. In the margins of these pages, messages written with an urgency that transcended time begged for help, for liberation. It was as if, even in death, these children refused to be silenced, looking for someone who could hear their pleas. As I delved deeper into this silent communication, a cold sensation invaded the room, an omen that the presence that inhabited the school, the source of all evil, was approaching. For a moment, the air seemed to vibrate with a dark energy, an invisible force that was watching, waiting, and calculating. I felt I was being tested, judged by eyes I couldn't see, a malevolent presence that delighted in my fear and determination. It was in the corridor, while I was looking for more answers, that I came across the shadow, a darkness so dense that it seemed to absorb the light around it. Fear froze my blood, but the need to face whatever it was drove me on. The shadow moved, an entity of hatred and suffering, a guardian of the secret that the school hid. I felt that this was the presence that held the children's souls captive, a core of malice that fed on their pain and despair. Facing this shadow was the most terrifying moment of my life. It wasn't just a physical struggle, but a battle of wills, where every whisper and movement carried the weight of countless sufferings. The surrounding energy pulsed with an intensity that threatened to overwhelm me. Children's whispers mingling with distorted laughter, a cacophony of despair and malice. I emerged from this confrontation changed, bearing the invisible marks of battle, but also with a deeper understanding of what was at stake. The souls of the children, Emily among them, were not only seeking release from eternal torment, but also justice, a chance to confront and overcome the darkness that had consumed them. I knew now that my journey was just beginning, a path that would lead me to the depths, not only of the school, but of my own courage and determination to confront evil in its purest form. In my search for more answers, I found a painting hidden behind a bookcase in the library. Covered in dust, it depicted the school principal, a man whose painted eyes seemed to follow my every move. There was something unsettling about that portrait, an air of authority mixed with a subtle cruelty, suggesting that he knew more about the shadows that haunted the school than anyone could have imagined. This painting was more than just a piece of art. It was a window into the soul of a man who played a central role in the tragedy that befell the place. In a locked room, the key to which I found hidden in the director's office, I discovered his diary. The pages revealed a man obsessed with the idea of control and power, willing to experiment with what he called the hidden potential of children. The content was disturbing, full of notes on rituals and practices that bordered on the supernatural, a macabre attempt to transcend the limits of science and morality. The director's words, written in meticulous handwriting, spoke of sacrifices and ceremonies, details that made the blood run cold. The revelation of these dark practices shed new light on the events that culminated in the fire. The children, subjected to these experiments, began to manifest an unusual connection, a kind of psychic chorus that became increasingly difficult to control. The diary ended abruptly, but among the last entries, there was a frantic note about an imminent event, a ceremony that promised to be the pinnacle of their research, but which clearly went horribly wrong. It was then that I heard, louder than ever, the collective cry of the children's souls, a sound that rang through the corridors and penetrated to the depths of my being. It wasn't just a cry of fear or pain, but a call for justice, a call that couldn't be ignored. That moment of clarity made me realize the magnitude of what I was facing. It wasn't just the story of a tragic fire, but of lives taken by a man who played at being God, using children as pawns in his macabre games. With the revelation of the horrors perpetrated by the director, my mission became clear. I needed to free the souls of these children, not just from the confines of the school, but from the suffering inflicted at the hands of a man whose ambition went beyond the limits of humanity. Armed with this new knowledge, I knew that the road ahead would be even more dangerous, but also that I couldn't turn back. The children's voices, now a constant in my mind, would guide my steps towards the justice they had been denied for so long. The secret passage to the basement was hidden under the floorboards of the principal's office, a discovery that left me perplexed. It was as if every stone, every dark corner of that school held secrets waiting to be discovered. The basement, a labyrinth of forgotten corridors and rooms, was the heart of the school, where the darkest experiments had been carried out. There I found relics of these horrors, objects that seemed to have been used in rituals and personal artifacts of the children, as if they were trophies of their macabre conquests. Among the shadows, I discovered the remains of an interrupted ceremony, a circle of black candles that had never been lit, books with pages marked in ancient rituals, and a makeshift altar. It was clear that the director was about to carry out something terrible, perhaps the final act in his quest for power. The surrounding artifacts spoke of an obsession not only with the occult, but with the manipulation of life and death. It was in the midst of this scene that I found the key to freeing the children's souls. An ancient manuscript, worn by time, detailed a purification ritual, but with a warning. In order for the souls to be freed, a sacrifice would be necessary. The realization of this fact weighed on me like a stone. The sacrifice required was not of a physical nature, but of a part of the very essence of whoever performed the ritual. It was a high price, but looking at the children's artifacts, feeling their voices filling every space of my mind, I knew it was a price I was willing to pay. Preparing the ritual required me to do more than just collect items. It required me to delve even deeper into the darkness of that school, searching for components that were imbued with the energy of the place. Every step forward seemed to be observed by the children's souls, their voices now a constant guide, a mixture of hope and sadness. When I finally began the ritual in the heart of the basement, the lit candles cast dancing shadows on the walls, as if the children were there with me, watching. However, it was at this moment that the malevolent presence made its most aggressive attempt to interrupt the process, manifesting itself with frightening force. I felt like I was being pulled into a fight, not just for the liberation of souls, but for my own soul. This entity, the true evil behind all the pain and suffering, showed itself with a ferocity I couldn't have imagined. But armed with the strength of the children's souls and the determination to end that cycle of terror, I faced the darkness, knowing that the fate of many depended on my courage. The confrontation with the malevolent entity in the heart of the basement was the hardest of my life. Every breath of icy wind, every moving shadow seemed to carry the essence of pure evil, a force that was determined not to let the children's souls go. But, armed with the artifacts and knowledge I had gathered, I fought with all my might. Every word of the ritual being a declaration of war against the darkness that refused to loosen its grip. As the ritual progressed, the entity's resistance grew, but something incredible began to happen. The children's voices, once whispers of despair and fear, joined mine, forming a chorus of strength and hope. It was as if they were there with me, lending me their energy, their light, against the darkness that held them captive. I felt Emily's presence more strongly than ever, as if she were by my side, guiding every word, every gesture. The climax of the ritual was a moment I will never forget. As I completed the last invocation, a burst of light filled the basement, so bright and intense that for a moment all I could see was blinding white. The air around me vibrated with pure energy, and then, as suddenly as it had begun, silence fell. The darkness was dispelled, replaced by a peace I had never felt before. The shadows, the whispers, the malevolent presence, everything had disappeared, leaving behind only a sense of calm and liberation. But victory came at a price. At the end of the ritual, I felt a part of me being taken away with the darkness. It was the necessary sacrifice, a part of my very essence, now forever intertwined with the school and the souls I had helped free. In the moments that followed, as the basement returned to its normal physical form, I knew that things would never be the same. The children's souls had found peace, but the mark of what had happened would stay with me forever. Despite the calm that now filled the place, a shadow of doubt remained in my heart. The battle had been won, but was the war against darkness really over? As I left the basement, carrying the marks of the ritual, I knew that some answers might never be found, and that some mysteries remain better left unsolved. The decision to leave the school after the ritual was not an easy one. Walking through those now silent corridors, where every step echoed with the memory of what had happened, was a surreal experience. Despite the sense of peace that the ritual had brought, a part of me couldn't help but feel that something was still wrong, a residual darkness that could perhaps never be completely eradicated. The children's souls had been freed, yes, but the shadow of the principal and his macabre experiments seemed to linger on the walls, a permanent reminder of the evil that had been perpetrated there. As I left, the echoes of the children's laughter accompanied me, now mixed with whispers of gratitude. It was a farewell, I believe, a last message from those whose voices had been silenced for so long. Looking back at the imposing silhouette of the school in the moonlight, I couldn't help but feel a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief at having done my part, at having given the children's souls the peace they deserved, sadness at the knowledge of what had been lost, at the lives that were taken long before they had a chance to really begin. The physical marks of the ritual, small scars that now adorn my body, were a constant reminder of that night. Each one told a story, not only of the battle that had been fought, but also of the strength and courage of the children whose lives had been so brutally cut short. They were the marks of an experience that changed the way I saw the world, a physical testimony to the price I had paid and would pay for the justice I sought. The last message I received from Emily, a feeling more than words, was a mixture of goodbye and warning. The fight against darkness, against the evil that men like the director represent, may never have a definitive end. But hope, the courage to face that darkness, is something that will remain with me, a beacon guiding my actions from now on. Returning to my normal life after this experience proved to be an almost impossible task. Nightmares, recurring visions of that night, and the feeling of being constantly watched became my constant companions. The school, now a resting place for children's souls, continued to occupy my thoughts, a reminder of what I had faced and what could still be lurking in the shadows. In the days that followed, the attempt to resume the routine was permeated by an inescapable sense of dislocation. The people around me went on with their lives, oblivious to the weight I was carrying, the battle I had fought and won, and the price I had paid. I often found myself looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see the shadows of the school stretching towards me, a constant reminder of that fateful night. The sight of the burning school, an image that haunted me both in my dreams and in my waking moments, was a powerful symbol of the destruction of the evil that was there, but also of the permanent scar it had left on the city's history and on my soul. The strange feeling of being connected to the children whose lives had been so tragically cut short didn't disappear with the conclusion of the ritual. If anything, that connection seemed to have strengthened. Their voice is a constant in my mind, a chorus of relief mixed with the sadness of what had been lost. I found myself visiting the school often, unable to stay away completely. It was as if part of me was still there, trapped between the walls that had witnessed so much pain. The echoes of the past, however, began to give way to a kind of acceptance. Visits to the school, once fraught with fear and determination, became moments of reflection, almost of peace. I realized, little by little, that my journey had been more than a quest for justice. It had been a path of self-knowledge, of confronting my own fears and the darkness that resides in each of us. The final step of that journey came unexpectedly. One night, as I looked at the school, now silent and somehow less threatening under the moonlight, I felt a change. It was as if a cycle had closed, the last page of a long chapter that had finally come to an end. The children's voices, once so clear in my mind, had quietened down, leaving behind a sense of calm. I knew then that it was time to leave the school behind, to get away from the shadow that had dominated so much of my time and thoughts. Walking away from that imposing structure for the last time, I couldn't help but look back, a silent farewell to the souls I had helped free, and perhaps, in a way, to myself. The school, with its stories of terror and redemption, would remain, but I had changed, forever marked by the experience, but also freed from it. And as I walked away, I knew that although the scars remained, the fear that had once ruled my heart had been replaced by something much more powerful: hope. Emily's last message, felt more than heard, was a farewell that I carried with me in the days that followed. It was a silent reminder that, although the battle at that school was over, the fight against the shadows that lurk in the corners of the world and within ourselves never really ends. This thought, rather than discouraging me, gave me a new determination. The experience at school had taught me not only about the presence of evil, but also about the strength each of us has to face it. Returning to my normal life was a greater challenge than I had expected. The marks of that night, both physical and emotional, had transformed me in ways I was still trying to understand. Friends and family noticed the change, a shadow in my eyes that spoke of things they hoped never to understand. And although I tried to return to my previous activities, there was a part of me that felt out of place, as if a part of me still wandered the corridors of the abandoned school. The sight of the burning school, which haunted me in my dreams, became a powerful symbol for me. Not only of destruction and loss, but also of purification and the possibility of starting over. It was a reminder that even in the ashes, there is hope for a new beginning. A chance to build something new on the foundations of what was lost. And then, as mysteriously as it began, my connection with the school and the souls who lived there began to fade. The visits became less frequent, the dreams less intense, until one day, I realized that the school had become just a memory, a closed chapter in my life. But the lessons I learned, the courage I found within myself, those would remain forever. The story of my involvement with the abandoned school and the souls of the children I met there ends here. But the journey it started continues. I disappeared in a way from the world I knew before, transformed by the experience. My story became part of the urban legend that surrounded the school, an echo of the truth lost among the rumors and whispers that still haunt those corridors. But somewhere within those walls, peace has been restored, an old debt finally paid. And as I walk away from the darkness that once consumed me, I take with me the light of the souls I helped free, a beacon against the night that always tries to envelop us.